And today we have Harold Burnham joining us live. Harold is incredibly an 11th generation shipwright from Essex, Massachusetts. And he's made a career of building traditional vessels. And Harold and I have known each other for more than 2 decades. And I met him first when Paul Haley, a marine surveyor in his area, called me and told me that this 29-year-old guy was building a schooner outside over the winter, uncovered, and and making a great job of it. And he said that he must be channeling some long dead shipwrights, because there's no way that a guy of his age and experience could pull this off. But he did pull it off, and he's parlayed that into an incredible career, which is going to be the focus of our conversation this afternoon. So with that, welcome, Harold Burnham. Hello, Harold.
Hello, hello.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to hide your photo and bring up your reality. Thanks for being here. I was just telling our viewers about the first time we met, which was when you were building the Lannon, and how you built this vessel. What's her overall length, Harold?
65.
65 feet, and here she is in frame. And one of the people I interviewed for the story I wrote about this, based on that interview, was Dana Story, who was one of your mentors and one of the last wooden shipwrights in Essex. His son carried on the tradition after that.
Yeah.
But I recall vividly Dana telling me that that when you told him what you were up to, he just laughed. He said, "There's no way somebody can pull that off." And then he said, "I went down there, and oh my, he's pulling it off." and you did. What information did you draw on, and how did you do this? Tell us about the site and the design, and what are we looking at here in the photo?
Well, the Lannon was I based it on it was built for my friend Tom Ellis, and he wanted a commercial fishing schooner, a real fishing schooner that he could use to take passengers out on and show them about what it was like to sail on a real Gloucester schooner. So the authenticity was very important, and we based the design on one of Mel McLean's boats, and had to change it to meet Coast Guard regulations. So the boat is basically traditional Essex construction, sawn frame, trunnel fastened, but it has an outside ballast keel, and is a little more freeboard than it might have had for fishing, and a plywood deck. So it was really a lot of modifications or we did a lot of improvising to get it so it would both be a efficient, effective charter boat and a Coast Guard inspected passenger boat and an authentic fishing schooner.
And yet the overall effect is authentic. I mean, I've seen her since she was launched, and it's absolutely authentic. She's a shrunken down Gloucester fishing schooner, but with the express purpose of carrying passengers.
Yeah, and she's been incredibly successful. The Ellises, who I built it for, did an amazing job of building up the business. They tied it at the Gloucester House restaurant in Gloucester, where Linquatas are selling fish in the restaurant, and the schooner business went hand in hand. And with their success, eventually I copied them, and that's where the Ardell came from. And Mike Rutstein hired me to build the Fame, which he runs out of Salem. So the boats have been quite successful at what they do, and I've also designed and helped a number of other people with Coast Guard inspected boats. And
great, and you sent me some photos of those, and I have them queued up here, and we're going to show our viewers some more examples of those. But But I wanted to jump to this photo now. I brought back that photo. Bear with me one moment while I find this. And this is you dubbing frames within ads, but that's not just any old ads. I mean, did I get the number correct? You are the 11th generation of the Burnhams, the
Well,
shipwright Burnhams of Essex.
that was what we said, and then a woman sent me a genealogy of myself and said I was the 12th. But needless to say that shipbuilding and Burnham's both go a long way back in Essex, and uh, that ads was my grandfather's ads. And not only do I try to build the boats authentically, but I really tried to learn and use the old ways, and the hand adzes and the hand tools they're great. I mostly use a power plane and a grinder and things like that for a lot of that work now, but I still pull out the ads, and I think it's important to learn the old ways, and I've taught a lot of the younger kids that I've worked with, a lot of folks, a lot about using those tools, and it's a lot about holding the tool comfortably and using your body as a jig kind of.
So in this photograph, these frames have been sawn with squared off edges, and you are now dubbing them or beveling them with the ads to get the planking to lie fair. Is that an accurate description of what you're doing?
Well, we bevel the frames. When we loft the boat, we make the molds, and we put the bevels on the molds, and we cut the bevels in the frames. But there's always a little bit of trim work and dubbing that needs to happen, and also we put flats on the frame, so the planks will have 100% contact when they're sitting against them. So there's always a little bit of dubbing in there, even with sawn in.
Yeah. And how did you glean this knowledge, Harold? I mean, there are great boat building schools out there today, but there's not a lot of opportunity to learn this kind of shipbuilding.
Well, I worked on small boats since I was a kid with my father and Brad Story and a number of the boat builders in the area, and grew up watching Brad and Dana and my father and Nick Hemian build boats, and also did a lot of it on my own. But when it came down to learning the older techniques with the sawn frames and the trunnels, it was a collaborative effort. Dana, luckily, was still around, and Ed Story, and they could tell us what to do, and then taking what they told us and what we read in books, and a lot of us working together. Jim Lowell was part of that crew, and Bob Parley, and Peter Little, and Francis Cleary, and a number of us all worked together, and we just figured it out. A lot of it was done in sheer terror. We built that boat in less than 6 months, and it was less than a year from the time I was hired as builder, and it took about over a month before I kind of assumed the role of the designer as well as the builder. And
you built it over, did you say 6 months?
Yeah,
outside.
we
Well,
laid right before Christmas, and launched her on the 21st of June.
Wow. And she was sailing that summer.
She sailed about 4 or 5 or 6 weeks later. I built the hull on that, and other Bruce Fortier did most of the spars and a lot of the rig, and Stanley Dulong was a rigger who both worked for myself and Dana Story. He's the only person that worked for both in the old yards, years and years and years ago, and in the in the modern era as well.
So you really are continuing an unbroken tradition then. I mean,
I like to think so. And yeah, if Tom Ellis hadn't come along when he did and wanted what he wanted, um, that so much would have been lost. But because there were people still around that I could ask, yeah, it's an unbroken tradition. I mean, Dana was down showing us how to drive trunnels and talking with Francis and the rest of the crew and showing me what to do, and we discussed staging and all sorts of things. And of course, Dana's son Brad, you know, amazing shipbuilder in of himself. He built 52 vessels and he helped out a lot. And Bob, who worked for Brad, worked on the Lannon. And so it hasn't been broken yet.
yeah. And if I recall correctly, more to the unbroken tradition, the site where the Lannon was built is at the Essex Shipbuilding Museum, which is adjacent to your property, your boatyard property, and the very site within the shipyard, the museum where it was built, is deeded for the purpose of shipbuilding. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually where we built the Lannon is actually on town land. It's not on the museum property.
But that property is adjacent to the museum. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
that town land, which is adjacent to the museum, which is adjacent, all of our properties abut, but the town property was set aside for shipbuilding in 1668 and for the men of Essex to build ships and employ workmen. Ipswich, which was Essex at the time, and employ workmen to that end, and it's been used continuously, almost continuously since 1668. And I built the Lannon there and the Lewis Story there. And I tell the young women that I work with that it's high time that they got busy and applied to the town for a permit to build a boat, because it really shouldn't be just for the men, it should be for the women as well.
Mhm.
So I like to hope that one of these younger ladies will take over that tradition and change it for the better.
And this site that we were just looking at is this is shot. Is this from standing on the site of the Lannon's construction and looking across the creek to
Yeah,
your
actually,
yard?
that's that picture where the person Dave Delory took that photograph. Who Dave is one of the many great photographers of Essex shipbuilding, and along with Lou Jocelyn, who took the previous picture, and going all the way back to John Clayton, and Dana's uncle took a lot of photographs. But he was standing on museum property, shooting over the town property and onto our property. That abut the all three properties abut at the mouth of the creek, which runs between my shop and the museum. So
And this is Fame, which is Mike
that's
Rutstein's boat. She runs from
yep,
Salem, Massachusetts, as a passenger boat.
yep. That's the
And
schooner Fame, and yeah, she's another 49 passenger vessel, um, built along the lines of a large Shabako boat. The original Fame was built in Annisquam in 1810 or 1811, and was one of the first privateers used during the what we call the War of 1812, and was an incredibly successful privateer. It was owned by 20 antecedents from.
Harold, I'm getting a little hiccup in your feed, and you seem to be frozen now. If people watching could just give us a little thumbs up in the comments section, how are things rendering on your end?
Uh,
You're back now, Harold. Okay. Well, my apologies for the interruption, but I've just put another photo up here, and this is the Fame, the one we just saw in frame, and she is sitting in the creek out behind your house next to the Lewis Story, and I believe these are both Shabako boats. Is that correct?
Yep, they're both Shibako boats. Um, the Story is obviously a lot smaller than the Fame. We built the Story in 1998 on the heels of the Lannon project at the Essex Shipbuilding Museum, and she's a modeled after early Shibako boat, um, and used a lot of the research from Lou Story and Howard Chappell and um, written descriptions from a number of individuals. And mentioning the design of these boats, I should definitely mention Eric Ronberg, who chimed in on the design of the Lannon and the Story and the Fame, and helped me getting when I was getting started in historic vessel design.
And Eric is an elite model maker too, from your area.
Yeah, he Eric Ronberg is now um, the marine curator, I believe, at the um,
Mhm.
Cape Ann Museum in
Right.
Gloucester, and he's made you know world renowned model maker, historian, and 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 he's a really an expert on many things, miniature, but mostly Gloucester fishing schooners and fishing schooner construction. He's done all kinds of things, but and was uh, very helpful with the design of the Lannon, and then um, we hired him as a consultant on both the Story and the Fame. And he and I still work together from time to time.
Harold, Sam Patterson, one of our viewers, asks about materials, and whether and historically the material's been sourced locally for Essex shipbuilding. And I'm wondering if you could tell us about that, but also segue into how you've sourced a lot of your material locally.
Well, yeah, historically, um, it, I think I remember Dana talking about the trees in at least maybe in person and in his book, um, when the when this area of Massachusetts was settled. It was 60 feet to the canopy, and there was a lot of white oak and white pine, enormous forests, um, and those forests by the early 19th century were largely depleted, and a lot of the wood was coming down the Merrimack. And after, I think it was about 1870 or 1872, um, we had rail coming into town. Before that, it was coming in schooners and other vessels, and being floated in. And when the rail connection was made, we were getting wood from Ohio and out west. Um, and interestingly, um, well, the wood was coming largely from the west, as well as the food and a lot of other things. Massachusetts forests grew back. Most of the land in Massachusetts was cleared in the early 19th century. I've heard that it was down to about 21% natural forest, and by the mid 90s, when I was building boats, Massachusetts at that point was the number one reforestation area in the planet, and was back up to about 75% natural forest. And those natural forests have been cut back since then to make way for houses and different different construction projects, and that's where I get my wood from, land clearers and arborists and tree companies who, um, when they're taking down making these incidental cuts for everything from golf courses to make way for schools and houses and things, that the wood, which would often not be suitable for sawmills, winds up here, and they've provided, and a lot of the people that have the wood cut are happy to have me have it and use it for these historic projects. So
Yeah. And so you're receiving your wood in the log, and there's some work to do there still. And I think you described your operation as vertically integrated yesterday.
yeah,
Uh,
it's a vertically integrated business. We get everything. We get most of the material that I use to build a schooner comes as raw material, whether it be bolts of cloth or logs or you know, bronze rod. And we do everything from milling the timber to making the sails, and this allows us to build boats um, that are incredibly labor intensive. When I started building boats, it was about 45% materials and 55% labor, and we've got it now so that uh, it's mostly labor, but because most of the people that work for me these days don't get paid, and I don't make any money, it's more material intensive, but the cost of the materials is down to a fraction of what it was.
And this is your sawmill, this photograph I just put up?
Yep, that's a Miser LT40 I got from my friend Tony Chaplick, who used it to cut all the wood for the Lannon and the Story and the Fame. And then when I got through with the Fame, Tony asked me if I wanted to buy his mill, and it was sort of like asking if I wanted to stay in business. So I bought Tony's mill, and yep, we still mill wood that mill is set up at the head of the yard, not far from the creek, and it's interesting. I was reading something Mary Kay's mother sent me the not long ago, which talked about Thomas Burnham, one of the first generation ancestors that settled Chabaco, and in 1647, I believe it was, he
Chabaco. Could I jump in just for a moment and explain Chabaco? I think we neglected to do that earlier. A former name for Essex.
Chabaco is the name was the name of it was Essex was formerly Chabaco Parish of Ipswich, Massachusetts, and in 1819, Chabaco Parish broke off from Ipswich and became its own town named Essex. So when we talk about Essex and Chabaco, we're talking about the same place, different eras. And Chabaco boats were boats built in Chabaco.
Mm-hmm. And so after the two vessels, or three we talked of earlier, the two Chabaco boats and the Lannon, you built a boat for yourself.
Yeah, I did one other small yacht in 2006. I did the Fame was 2003, and then I did a small yacht in 2006, and then after the 2008 crash with no orders on the horizon, um, I had been cutting wood and stacking up material to build a boat for a long time, hoping a customer would come along and I could sell them the wood and build them the boat. And no customers showed up, and I was faced with the only intelligent way out of the boat building business at that point was to build a boat. That's just what we did, and the Ardell was born out of utter desperation, and what was amazing to me was when I started in on it, I just told everybody flat out I couldn't pay anyone, I didn't have any money, and just friends just came by and helped out and helped out and helped out and worked, and we built that boat in one winter with no paid help, and also using the generosity of countless individuals who actually helped to fund what we needed to pay for her. And so she was completed in one winter without a loan, with no paid help. And
what year was that, Harold?
that was the winter of 2010, 2011. And since we finished her, we've run her out of the Gloucester Maritime Heritage Center, or what we call Maritime Gloucester, over in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And she's kept us busy. We've taken almost every third, fourth, and fifth grader on Cape Ann sailing since we built her, as part of a Maritime Gloucester program, and we've tried to give back to all those who really helped us when we needed it most, and taken a lot of them sailing and up and down the coast, and tried to really let people enjoy the boat.
I've just put another photo of her up here. Oh, she's obscured a little bit by the title, which I'm going to try to hide. There, good.
Oh, there you go.
Good. And in the foreground here, we didn't earlier get to see a finished photo of the Lannon, but there she is, just a breathtaking shape and so evocative of a Gloucester fishing schooner.
Yeah, and that's mentioning giving back. That is the Lannon and Ardell working together, um, doing a fundraising sale for a local charity, and the Ellises who hired me to build the Lannon, and like I like to say that that my customers, many of them have become amongst my closest friends, and that's the Lannon and the Ardell both raising money for a local charity working together, um, and it's what we do a lot in Gloucester. And we were having a informal race, and the old racing fishermen are, that was a important part of our Gloucester history, and it's an exciting thing to do, and it's been fun sailing with them. I like to tell people the best thing, the thing that people like to see most from the Ardell is the Lannon. I think it's vice versa too.
This is, I don't have the name of the vessel being launched here.
That's the Ardell launch.
That is Ardell. And this is a side launching,
Yep.
which is I recall you doing copious research on this technique for the Lannon, which didn't quite work out that way, but you since perfected it.
Yeah, yeah. The Lannon uh, was launched in a different way by somebody else, and but after we got through with the Lannon, all the vessels since have been side launched, and Tom was nervous about the launch, and rightfully so. When we launch them on their sides, what we do is we just build a greased skidway under one bilge, and drive grease slabs under the keel, and is when gravity overtakes friction, they just take off down the hill, and as the bilgeway is usually steeper than the angle of the keel, it lays right down on its side, and it's quite dramatic and entertaining, and it draws quite a crowd, and you can see behind the boat in that picture, um, just people lining the banks as they do actually all the way around the boat. We, as we understand it, the crowds at most of our launches are equal to or better than the population of the town.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and it's really it's when we launch a boat, it's an event that brings people from all over, but also most of the locals like to enjoy, and it's an unusual thing to do, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll see people working under the boat all day before preparing it, and there's a lot of excitement. Great time.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of consternation with the first one you did, but do you feel like you have that down now to is science the right word, to a process that is predictable? And
Oh yeah, it's we have it down so it's very predictable, but it's amazing. The first few I did, I was very nervous about, and studied and learned a lot, and then um, some of the ones since I actually got complacent and made mistakes. But the thing that's most fun about a side launch is they're unpredictable in that you never know when they're going to start. The trigger, there's no hard trigger, and so you never know when they're going to start. And then sometimes when they start, they hang up. And but as Francis Burnham, who launched the Lannon, told Tom, the thing about those old side launches is there's a lot of splintering wood, and occasionally the grease will catch fire, and um, you know it all appears horrible, but the water cradles the boat. And the other side of it is that I mentioned to Tom later on is the boats are rugged enough so that they can take being bounced down a mud bank. It's really if they can't take that, you shouldn't go to sea in them.
Right. And more recently, Harold, we'll get to your current project in just a moment, but you represented the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the rebuilding of the schooner Ernestina. And I'm bringing you back now, Harold. There you are.
Well, yeah, the Ernestina was built in Essex, probably 2 stones throw away from here. This yard where I'm sitting right now, over at the James and Tar, and I can't remember whether it was Tar and James or James and Tar then, but they built a number of schooners. It was built in 1894 using many of the techniques that I learned to build the boats that I built. And uh, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, um, she had been rebuilt a number of times, and uh, she was in very tough shape. And the I took over in 2008. I got hired as the owner's rep and wrote a plan for her preservation, which basically stated at that point she was more patched than pants. And she, in order to make a boat that's both a historic ship and, and keep it historic and at the same time make it safe to put young school children on, you have to make some concessions. Um, and so I wrote a plan that called for the boat to be rebuilt in such a way that she was more stable um, and safe than she had been originally.
And did that involve reballast? The hull is identical, but the ballast configuration is different now.
Well, at that point, the hull had changed form, and age had really taken its toll on her. So we had to restore it called for the restoration of the lines, um, and changing of the structure. The ballast is outside now. In many ways, the Ernestina is a lot based on things that we changed on the Lannon, with outside ballast, heavier frames, light, with stringers instead of sealing so that you can inspect the frames. It was not only rebuilt to be better, but also easier to inspect, taking into account a lot of the requirements of the Coast Guard, so that she could be inspected and maintained and last longer. And David Short, uh, Herman Henriksen, who rebuilt the Adventure, provided the oak, and David Short was the master shipwright on the restoration process. So where I did the structural redesign, David did the actual refairing of the lines and reshaping of the hull. And all in all, I think she came out quite well. She came out very good. And David did a fantastic job. And Eric Graves, president of the yard up there, was great to work with. And the state got people to donate money, and the state kicked in a lot of money. And so it was well funded, and just all in all, a great project. I was glad to be involved in it. A lot of great people.
And you've moved for, I showed you a little plug for WoodenBoat, but we just recently completed a 3-part series on her history and rebuilding.
Yeah,
and,
it was excellent articles.
Oh yeah, we're in awe of the people who reported them.
Yeah,
that was
great. They were. It was great people. It was all good.
Yeah, and that was Randy Peffer did the historical pieces, and David O'Reilly, who is a retired reporter from Philadelphia, I believe his son worked with you on that,
Yeah, David
the
O'Reilly
construction
wrote
crew.
the story, and Chris O'Reilly was one of the shipwrights. There was a lot of great ones that worked on the boat, and Tom Farrell did the naval architecture, I mean, there's too many for me to name them all and give
Sure.
them
Yeah.
all, make it fair. But yeah, a lot of great people, and
Yeah.
just a lot of fun, and outstanding
Yeah.
product.
Well, Harold, you don't shy away from big projects and total rebuilds. In fact, I recall you telling me one of your early sloop projects was a friendship sloop that needed to be retopped for the season, and you basically tore this boat down to the water line in April and had her sailing that summer.
Yeah, yeah, that was the
Was that
old
the
Chrissy.
Chrissy? And I
Yeah,
believe you traded her recently for another big project. And
well,
this boat must be occupying a lot of brain space right now.
yeah, that's the Savannah W. Beal. I sold Chrissy in 2006 to Ed Zimmerman, and he sold it to Stephen Pagels, who has owned the Savannah W. Beal several times. And that's me when I went up to see her in March of 2018. Um, she's There was a whole bunch of things that intrigued me about the boat, and I had remembered her sailing off of Booth Bay and sailing here and there, um, and somehow once in a while a boat will just catch your interest, and you you can't let it go. And I went up and looked at her, and um, uh, haven't been able to get away from her since. I think she's just a spectacular boat. And Mary Kay, my sweetheart, and I went up there, and she took the picture there, and we've just had it's been a lot of fun ever since we got her.
And you own her now, correct?
Yeah, we horse traded it with Steve for some sales and a few other things, and Steve was really just absolutely phenomenal to work with. And once he knew we were interested in it, he he basically did whatever it took to get her in our hands and help us get her down here. And he's been incredibly helpful
Yeah,
on a number of
and
different
here
things.
she, I believe you told me Graham McKay of Lowell's Boat Shop took this photo of her arriving in Gloucester.
Actually, that
Oh,
one was Graham took, I think, the next one, but that's a
okay.
Mary Barker photo. Mary
Hmm.
is the photographer for the Schooner Adventure, and I think she took that photo from Adventure's deck. Um, and she's just great. Mary does a lot of photographs for us, and that's the Beal arriving with the Ardell. Captain Amanda Madeira had the Ardell that day out with a whole bunch of our friends and family who were there to greet us coming into Gloucester. And one of the funny things about that photo is when we rounded Eastern Point in the Beal, um, which she was a bit tired. It was quite an interesting trip bringing her down, but we rounded Eastern Point, sheeted everything in, started to beat her up the harbor, and no sooner did we get everything sheeted in and tacked over, the mainsail just blew into smithereens. And I think the boat was telling us she was done. And so we sailed her in with a blown out mainsail, and then we hauled her at the railway at Maritime Gloucester, and that's actually the Beal last November 10th or 11th. Graham McKay towed us from Gloucester around to Essex with as part of he works for Towboat USA, and so they showed up at 4 in the morning in Gloucester, and he muckled onto the Beal and towed us around Cape Ann, and we got to Essex quite a bit early. Um, Nobody expected how easily and wonderfully the Beal would tow. We took all the ballast off of her. We cleaned her engine out, and when she was light, um, she towed beautifully. And we dropped the tow for a while and sailed her around in Ipswich Bay, waiting for the tide. So
Oh, fun. And she's hauled. Well, she's not hauled out now. We're going to get to in just a moment
Yeah,
where she is now. She had a little adventure recently.
yeah. Oh yeah, she's back in the creek at that's her in the creek at my shop, and uh, we stored her there all winter last winter, and um, uh, I actually opened up the seacocks and opened up a few holes in her and let the tide flow in and out, keep her sweet, and keep her from moving around. And in a recent storm, she fell over, and um, we had to right her and get her out of the way so the museum could use their um, wall and put the Lewis story back in the water. And went down to right her and put some barrels in her because I was afraid she might not come up, and plugged all the holes. And of course, she floated right up. But while I was down there, interestingly, she was filled with alewives or river herring. And the boat
Hmm.
had been built as a herring fishing schooner in 1911 by Frank C. Adams in East Booth Bay, Maine. And, amazingly, from the bottom of the Essex River, it was still catching herring 109 years later. So that's heritage.
And your plans for her, Harold? You clearly have intentions to rebuild her and operate her.
Yeah, we have on our website schoonerardell.com. We have a page on the Beal, a cup with a copy of our preservation plan. Um, we're rebuilding that's written in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior's standards for ship preservation projects. I've been doing a lot of preservation projects, and there's standards you have to use, just like the standards of the, or similar to the standards for the Coast Guard that you have to use to make sure they're safe. And so we've written a plan for her, and we're going to rebuild her and run her out of Gloucester, probably out of maritime Gloucester, just alongside our Ardell, and use her for passenger and passenger work and marine research, and maybe even a little party fishing.
And is that project in progress yet?
The these projects they start as dreams, and it became real when I drove up to look at the Beal, and it's gotten more and more real as we brought her down. But the physical work on the boat, uh, we've taken the ballast out, we've taken the interior out, taken the engine out, we're redoing the engine, and lately I've been milling a lot of the timber, the deck beams, and I've got the bulkheads all milled out. And in the next few weeks, we'll probably start on the heavy timber and the framing.
Oh, great. Oh.
We've got the loft all cleaned out. We're gonna, as we did with the Ernestina, we're gonna go back to reloft the boat and you know, basically get the shape all back to as close as we can to what it was.
Yeah, but this will happen within the structure of the existing boat.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's it'll still be the same boat when we're through.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, when people sail on it, you know, in the future, and they think of what it was in the past. I mean, all these boats evolve, and but they're still the same boat.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that. Really looking forward to that project coming along. And
Yeah.
Harold, we have another photo here, which we didn't touch on earlier, but is this is you with your father and your son?
Yep, that's myself and my son and my father. Um, my son Alden is got a we got and I got a grant from the Mass Cultural Council in 2017 or 16, and we part of the grant was to basically it was an apprenticeship grant, and Alden uh, wanted to learn the old techniques, and so he rebuilt in this apprenticeship the first boat that my father built. back in 1971, and it's named for my mother and his grandmother, and built by his grandfather. And we rebuilt her over that winter, and had a big relaunching party, and got my dad out and my mom out sailing a few more times, and my dad's since passed, but it was a great experience for all of us, and particularly my son, and who got to learn a lot and work with his father and his grandfather on the boat named for his grandmother. So good,
Right.
it was a good story, and he'll be involved in the Beal and has been involved so far. And he also is skipper on the Ardell. And,
Great. And he's pursuing a teaching career, I think you told me.
Yep. It's funny. My dad built boats really as a hobby, and it became my way of life. And I've done a lot of teaching as a hobby, and it's going towards Alden's career, and you know, it's good. And Alden's sister Perry, who also you probably remember on the Chrissy, is involved in more in the business end of things, but she's they're both kids are doing really well, and it's there's that part too, which is great.
Great. Yeah. Well, Harold, one more topic I'd like to touch on is Carhartts, if we may.
Yeah.
You, what is, how many, what's your rate of burn for Carhartts? Carhartt jeans. These are.
I guess first off, we should say that Carhartts are the preferred clothing for shipbuilding. That all of the great shipbuilders today wear Carhartt clothing.
Yeah. No, I should qualify this and say that we're not getting paid to talk about Carhartts, but
okay.
But if I recall correctly, you did get paid for
a
quite
few
a
years ago. Actually, 9. When I finished the Ardell, the Carhartt clothing company came and they wanted to set up a store that was evocative of the shipyard, and so they bought a bunch of the props from the shipyard and used them in the store, and they took photographs and made a store down in the Liberty Place Mall. And part of it was they wanted some clothing, and they said, "Well, give us all your old Carhartt clothing, and we'll replace it with new." And so out of the deal, I got 35 pair of pants, brand new, all the same size, and
they got all your beat up ones.
Yeah, and that was almost 8 or 9 years ago, and I've almost worn through all 35 pair of pants. So I'm hoping that maybe they can help me out there, and that they might need some more old worn Carhartts to hang in other stores.
Very well. Well, Harold, thank you very much for sharing all this today, and thank you folks who've chimed in today from all over the place, from Europe, from right down the road in Belfast, from Brazil. And if you look at the comments section afterward, Harold, I think you'll see a few distant relatives in there too.
Yeah,
chiming in from far-flung places.
Yes, and yeah, thanks to everyone for watching. It's an honor to work with you and WoodenBoat, Matt, and really, I'm humbled by anybody who would take the time on a beautiful day to watch this.
Well, thank you so much, Harold, and we're really looking forward to watching the Beal come together.
As we are too.
All right. Well, best wishes, and I hope to see you in person soon.
Okay. Yes. Yep. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.